Greetings, fellow judgers. Hope your week is going well so far. Can't believe we're already this far into the course. I hope you're getting something out of this class, and I hope it's been a good experience so far. If you feel lost or like something is over your head or you have questions, please do feel free to email me. A number of you have felt that freedom, and I think it's been very productive. So please ask me questions if anything is troubling you or if something in the course just doesn't make sense. Fortunately, we have what I would consider sort of an easy week this week, or maybe I should say an easier week. So part of that is intentional to give you some chance to catch up on your reading. So if you've gotten behind in your reading and you need to do some more reading this week, this would be a good time to do that. And also, that would be good review for the midterm exam. So just a couple of details on the midterm exam. I will post the exam on July 19, which is, if I've done my calendar correctly, a Thursday. And then the exam will be due on July 20, Sunday. So I did that intentionally to try to keep the Thursday, Sunday rhythm that we built up so far, try to keep that going and sort of have those days of the week in your mind as you're preparing your exam. So you'll have what are essentially 2 weekends to work on the exam. I know that in ministry, weekends aren't necessarily free time, maybe your busiest times of week, but hopefully in between your work and your potential travels and other things, that this is sufficient time for you to do your exam. If you don't think it is and you realize already that you're going to have some scheduling issues, please do let me know and we'll work something out. Basically, the exam is going to be a list of what I would call short essay questions. You don't have to do a works cited or anything like that, but just answer the questions, and they should be fairly straightforward questions about material that we've covered in this course. I'll probably have a word count minimum because, as you know, Fuller is in love with word counts, so we'll probably have that. And I think you'll find them, again, fairly straightforward. I don't mind at all if you collaborate with other students in the class. I think that would be great, so feel free to do that. I'd rather you didn't just cut and paste each other's answers, but so try to collaborate honestly, but this isn't necessarily a closed book exam. You can use resources, that being what we've been reading, what people have posted, other people's ideas. So just to go through that process and solidify some of the things that we've talked about. So as I said, today is an easy week, but we have a really difficult text. And if you're frustrated with the Ryan book, which I know, as I mentioned at the beginning of this course, sometimes students are, sometimes they're put off by his style, sort of, I don't know, seems like he comes up with ideas sort of out of the blue sometimes, or maybe a little too free in his reading. But here, at least for this week, I think he's really helpful because the story itself, just the narrative itself, is confusing. So you might have to spend some time, even though this is just one chapter in Judges, you might have to spend some time going through the narrative a couple of times, maybe writing out who some of the players are because there's a lot of different names and they can get really confusing. And just walk yourself through the narrative, and hopefully Ryan will be a help here this week and just to help you understand what the story is. And generally speaking, this week, the story is about Israel's experiment in kingship. And the main character, Abimelech, is appropriately named. His name means "my father is king." And even though, excuse me, Gideon refused the kingship, there was still sort of hints of royalty in that story, and Abimelech is certainly utilizing the fact that he's Gideon's son to try to gain power. Now, one thing that struck me when I was reading this again this week is that really Yahweh is completely absent in this process of gaining power. So, as we mentioned before, sometimes we have very explicit call stories, such as in the case of Gideon, where Yahweh clearly calls Gideon and works with him and sort of helps him understand his will and carry it out in his fight with the Midianites. Abimelech has seemingly nothing to do with Yahweh. So he certainly is a king that has power, but he really doesn't have any divine authority. So it's just a power grab. There's no spirit that comes upon him. It seems like there's no real acceptance by the general population of Israelites, like we might see in the Deborah story. It's an agreement made between Abimelech and a group of elders in Shechem who are his mother's relatives. So he exploits family and kinship in order to gain power. He's a politician. He figures out a strategy. He figures out how he's going to gain power, and he does it. And in that sense, he's not too different from the way other kings gain power in the ancient Near East, in this part of the world. So he is a king in some sense like all the other nations. And this is not what Israel is supposed to be about. I was also reminded of a verse in Hosea 8:4, where Hosea is talking to Israel, and he says, "They have made kings, though not through me. They have set up thrones, but without my knowledge." So it's a process where Yahweh is not involved. They are appointing kings and appointing leaders, but there's nothing divine about it, I guess I would say. Another issue that this raises, especially again in the name Abimelech, my father is king, is the idea of hereditary power. And if you know anything about the kings in the ancient Near East, typically they hung on to power through heredity. So if your father is king, chances are the son is going to be king. And families and family structures and clan structures all work to support the central power. But this is not, or it seems that this is not what Israel is originally called to. So if you think about Moses, again, as our sort of paradigmatic good leader, which I think is always helpful, how do we think of power passing on after Moses dies? What happens to Moses's leadership, to Moses's power? Does it go automatically to his sons? And the answer is clearly no. So we know who Moses' sons are, Gershom and Eleazar, and they're not really characters in the Bible at all. We don't really hear what happens to them, and they are never significant figures. God chooses Moses, and then God chooses Joshua, someone from a completely different family, a different type of leader, you might say, but not anybody that's assumed to take power just because of who they're related to. And this is a theme that repeats over and over and over again in Scripture. So if you think about that little passage from Samuel that we read last week about where the Israelites are asking Samuel to give them a king. And one of their excuses is, well, your sons are horrible. They are clearly not fit to take over after you go. What's going to happen to us? And I think in general, there's a lot of anxiety in the book of Judges about what's going to happen after leaders die, because when leaders die, things sort of fall apart. So people are understandably anxious about how that's going to work. They don't see anybody kind of in the family line as an obvious successor to leadership. So they get very, very nervous that Yahweh is not going to find a leader for them, and they want something that is, I don't know, a little more orderly, a little more like the way other people do it, gravitate in that direction. We also have the story of Eli in the book of 1 Samuel. So I would say Eli is kind of a marginal leader himself, but his sons are clearly terrible and not fit to take over. And in general, I would say in the Deuteronomistic history, oftentimes sons are worse than fathers. So sort of this whole narrative of decline where things go downhill and the sons can't match the great things that their fathers did. There's another thing at issue here too, which I think comes into play in terms of understanding what these Israelites want in terms of power and what Yahweh wants in terms of power. It's interesting that, as you may recall, Gideon had 70 sons, plus apparently this other son by this concubine in Shechem. And one of Abimelech's arguments is, well, you can't have 70 people ruling over you. Surely you just need one person with with concentrated power to lead Israel. And what's interesting about that is that Moses, again, the paradigmatic good leader, himself appointed 70 elders to help him rule over Israel, to judge legal matters, administrative matters, and so forth, to judge disputes. So even the model of Moses is a model of diffused power. As central as Moses was to the Exodus project, there were apparently other elders, other people that helped Moses out his administrative duties. So the idea of diffused power seems to be something that the Exodus and sort of by extension the Deuteronomist thinks is a good thing. And Abimelech is working directly opposed to that. He wants concentrated power. He wants all of the power for himself. So I think that is one of the other ways in which the whole experiment in kingship really goes downhill. So you'll also notice in this discussion that the word power keeps coming up. And I personally think the issue of power is something that is really central in the book of Judges, and maybe even is a central theme in the entire Bible. So we'll see contrasts of power that seems to come from God versus power that human beings take up on their own, which usually tempts them to exploit other people. So power is good if it's used in the right way, but as we all know, power can be very corrupting. And if you looked at the Gideon narrative, I know it's really not all that clear, but if you sort of think that Gideon sort of had a downfall towards the end, or a degree of deterioration or something, I would say that part of that is or was due to his power that he gained as he kind of retired from military action. I don't know, you can disagree with me on that, but I think this story this week is definitely a story about power. And of course, the story and the theme of power, again, causes us to reflect on the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, where Jesus is the model of somebody that doesn't claim power for himself, but rather, as we know, gives up power, gives up the power that he has as the Son of God. And so it's sort of the flip side of this power grab. Jesus is the power, let the letting go of power, just the opposite of what we're seeing here. So Jesus is a different kind of deliverer, a different kind of savior. The power of Jesus comes not through manipulating other people, being able to rule over people, or his disciples being able to rule over people, but through the giving up of power. So it's a completely different model. A few other things I was thinking about is just in terms of some intertextuality, and I can't help but think about the story of Cain and Abel when I read the story of Abimelech killing all of his brothers except for the one that seems to escape. And we can think about other brother stories that I've mentioned in this course that either end in death or destruction, or sort of a risk of conflict. Also, when I read this story and then I think about Israel's request for a king later on in 1 Samuel, I think it helps for me highlight how ridiculous that request is. When we had somebody that rose to kingship, it was a horrible, horrible mistake, and there was a lot of death and suffering as a result. I also think about how Shechem functions as a center of power, and it functions sort of symbolically in the Deuteronomistic history. So, for example, when Joshua is about to leave the scene in Joshua 24, he gathers all of the people, all of the tribes of Israel at Shechem, all the elders, the heads, the judges, and the officers, and them one more time. Like, I'm on my way out here. He says, if you're unwilling to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve. You're either going to serve the gods of your ancestors, the gods of the Amorites, or you're going to serve Yahweh. And the people all say, far be it for us to forsake the Lord to serve other gods. And then he questions the people again, and they reiterate their loyalty to Yahweh. So I think, as I believe about it could be a different commentator, but the place where Abimelech executes his brother, it seems to be the same place where Israel took this pledge to follow Yahweh. So there's a great deal of irony there in terms of how far Israel has departed from that pledge in Joshua. So it gives us sort of a measuring point, or a place to look back to see what has happened between point A and point B that I think is really interesting. There's a lot of other stories about Shechem in the Bible that relate to power. So this is where all of Israel gathers when Solomon's son Rehoboam wants to be king, and the elders of Israel ask him, are you going to enslave us like your father did? And Rehoboam sort of thinks about it, and he asks people, different groups of people, the elders and sort of his buddies, what he should do. And the elders say, really what your father did wasn't right here. You should really back off on that. And then he asks his buddies what he should do, and they say, no, go for it. You can, be even tougher than your father was, grab even more power than your father did. And when he tries to do this, most of the other tribes say, bye, we're not going to participate in your projects anymore. So, another struggle for power. It's also the site of the rape of Dinah in Genesis 34. So we have a brutal king and his son who you can just read that whole kind of crazy story in Genesis 34. The brothers become very embarrassed because their sister has been raped, and in turn they kind of kill off everybody in the town. So another place of conflict. So sometimes it's interesting to take just tidbits of the story, like Shechem. Okay, why is this significant? And go, just use a concordance. You can use Google, electronic search, electronic Bible if you have one, and see what other significant events have occurred there, which might give you some good intertextual readings to help you understand this particular story in relation to other stories that took place at this spot. Doesn't always work, it's not always productive, but sometimes I think it can be a very productive interpretive move, and it can help you as you're looking at passages and as you're writing your papers and thinking about why is this place significant. So my own conviction is that there is nothing in Judges, or there's nothing in the Bible for that matter, that's there by accident. That the author isn't just writing down events from, this is not a newspaper, writing down events from his day, and this happened, and I'm just recording the facts. To me, that's not what it's about. Um, First of all, why would Israel record facts that were uncomplimentary to its history? Why would they preserve these stories generation after generation after generation, which is a very difficult and expensive process? So for me, these stories are here for a specific reason. They say something theologically. Sometimes it's a little difficult for us to figure out what that is, but I think in the mind of the Israelites, these were important stories because they say something about their own identity or something about their relationship to Yahweh. So, questions for this week. I'll give you several questions to write on, so I'll give you a choice of 3. And the first one is, how is the anonymous woman in Judges 9:53 similar to Yael in Judges? So look at the anonymous woman in Judges 9:53 if you don't know who I'm talking about. And if you choose to write on this, maybe talk about how this particular story affects your reading of Yael. So if you read this story and then think back to Yael, does that make you more or less, I don't know, sympathetic to what Yael is doing, or maybe understanding a little better what Yael is doing? I don't know, but how do these 2 stories work intertextually? How are they the same? Are they trying to call attention to each other? And do they maybe, shade your reading a little bit? And I think oftentimes the Bible works this way. So, and if they do, how does that work? So something about that. The second question, how would you compare more specific, and I've talked about this a little bit, but how would you compare the way Abimelech comes to power with the other leaders and judges? And do you think that the rise of Abimelech is in some respects related to, again, the decline or downfall, if you think there was one, of his father Gideon? So is Abimelech coming to power? Does that event have something to do with the last days of Gideon? Are those connected in some way? And then thirdly, another question, why is the story of Abimelech even in Judges? He doesn't seem to be, ordained by God. I don't know, it's just a horrible instance. So why is it here? What is it trying to tell us? And why has the story been preserved? So you can write on number 1, how is the anonymous woman in Judges 9:53 similar to Yael? Or how is Abimelech's rise to power different from the other judges? Does it have anything to do with the downfall of Gideon? And 3, why is this story here in Judges? Why are we hearing about it? What are we supposed to get out of it? And then, if you're all done and you want to, I won't make this required, but if you'd like to respond to this question, and I'm only doing this because even though final papers seem like, oh, that's a long ways away yet, it's good to start thinking about some of these issues. So if you have a theme or something, a particular theme or a story in Judges that you think has a good modern day application, and I'm not saying that you're committed to writing about this, but if you have some ideas kind of milling around in your head about, I think this is a really good theme, and I think this has some practical application in our life today, maybe just jot that down so other people can read and ruminate a little bit on your ideas. I think in Judges, the stories are super, super interesting. So usually there's not too much of a problem of people finding interesting stories to write on. But sometimes people have a little trouble about thinking about, how do I incorporate this story? What does this story have to say about my life in the modern world? If you have some thoughts on those, just jot that down at the end of the Dale question for this week. If you don't have any thoughts yet, don't worry. I'll give you more chances to present them. So I think that's the end of first impressions for this week. Same process as we've always done. Answer my question, post a question of your own in participant questions, and then by Sunday, answer two of your fellow participants' questions. All right, have a great week. If you have any questions, please do feel free to contact me. Hope everything's going well. Hope you're having a good time with judges. Talk to you soon. Bye.